other big stories we're following tonight, including President Trump. He's now going on the offensive in the wake of the Mueller report, at least the summary of it that was released, and his administration is launching a new effort to take down Obamacare. I'll speak with the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. There you see him once again. He's here live in the Situation Room. Let's
in any obstruction when that is not exactly the case. But the Trump administration appears to be diving headfirst into yet another controversy, siding with an effort to overturn Obamacare without a clear health care plan of its own. Soaking in the findings from special counsel Robert Mueller's report, President Trump marched up to Capitol Hill to declare victory. But he didn't stick to the facts.
The Mueller report was great. It could not have been better. It said no obstruction, no collusion. It could not have been better.
But that's not true. While Attorney General William Barr's summary of the Mueller report did state that the special counsel found the Trump campaign did not conspire or coordinate with the Russian government, the question of obstruction was left to the Justice Department. And it was Barr and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein who decided not to prosecute. Democrats aren't taking the president's word for it and demanding to see the full report.
We don't need an interpretation by an attorney general who is appointed for a particular job to make sure the president is above the law. We need to see the report.
The president also accused unspecified forces of conspiring against him.
We cannot let it ever happen again. It went very high up and it started fairly low, but with instructions from the high up. This should never happen to a president again. We can't allow that to take place.
Mr. Trump has accused the Obama White House of wiretapping him without evidence. And he's blamed the late Senator John McCain for the release of a dossier detailing the president's alleged misdeeds. But one of the president's top allies, Senator Lindsey Graham, now says he urged McCain to give the dossier to the FBI.
John got the dossier. He called me up and said, "What do you think? Think I should turn it over to the FBI?" I said, "Yeah, that was it."
How did the president respond to that?
No, never mind.
One area where there is some agreement, impeachment appears to be off the table.
I don't think they're talking about impeachment.
Impeachment's not on the table until it is on the table.
But new battle lines are being drawn, specifically over Obamacare, after the Justice Department sided with the federal judge's ruling striking down the Affordable Care Act, saying in a statement that the district court's comprehensive opinion came to the correct conclusion. The president jumped into damage control mode.
Let me just tell you exactly what my message is. The Republican Party will soon be known as the party of health care. You watch.
In the run-up to the midterms, the president vowed to take care of people with pre-existing conditions, one of Obamacare's key protections.
I will always fight for and always protect patients with pre-existing conditions. You have to do it.
After running on protecting Obamacare during the midterms, Democrats are more than ready to resurrect the issue for the 2020 campaign.
Trump position ties a 2-year anchor around the neck of every Republican for the next 2 years.
Now, at least one target of the Russia investigation is seizing on Mueller's findings in the hopes of a pardon. Former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos confirmed to CNN that his attorney is seeking a pardon from the president. Papadopoulos told CNN if offered one, it would be an honor to accept. The president has sounded open to the idea of pardons, though he has told reporters he hasn't given that prospect a whole lot of thought just yet. Wolf.
All right, Jim Acosta at the White House, thanks very much. Joining us now, President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York. Mayor, thanks very much for coming in.
Nice to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about the Attorney General's summary of the Mueller report. You have a copy over there.
Got it right here.
I have a copy over here. The president is now saying the Mueller report, in his word, is great, and that Robert Mueller, who spent nearly 2 years investigating all of this, acted honorably. Do you agree with the president?
Not that he acted honorably. I would have to disagree with my client.
Tell us why you would disagree with your boss, your client, the president of the United States.
We've had, some people see it differently, and maybe I was in the trenches more. I have a mixed view of it. I think that it's almost a Jekyll and Hyde situation. I think he did some very fine things, and I think they straightened out a lot of very difficult situations. That whole thing with Cohen lying about there was an agent that supposedly had a tape that showed that the president counseled Cohen to lie. They immediately rebutted that because it was completely untrue. I thought that was a noble thing to do, prosecutorial tradition. I thought their treatment of Manafort was way over the top. I think that shouldn't be allowed. I think the Justice Department should look into taking somebody, put them in solitary confinement, basically telling them what you think they're lying about, and that person could also be telling the truth, and then bringing him back 13 times and letting the guy basically know in his head that if he just says what you want, you're going to get out of solitary confinement.
Sounds to me like you're recommending that the president pardon him.
No, I'm not.
But you're saying he was treated unfairly.
Well, that's up to the president. I'm not recommending any pardons. I've got nothing to do with pardons, and I've taken the same position on pardons from day one until now, which is no pardons are going to be considered at this time. This would be the wrong time to consider pardons. But that's not my job. That's the White House counsel's job and the president's job. The reality is that whether you think he should get a pardon or not, he was treated in almost a grossly horrible way. And it shouldn't be allowed just because he's Manafort and people are angry at him. The guy, after all, is not a terrorist and he's not an organized criminal. I'm not sure they get treated that way. And then
He eventually pleaded guilty in addition to being convicted in a court of law.
Yeah, but he never said what they wanted him to say. And that's why he got that big long sentence. They said
he's about to go to jail for 7.5 years.
I'm not saying he's blameless. I'm telling you, he was treated horribly. And he was treated in a way that's very, very dangerous because a prosecutor comes very close to suborning perjury when you do that. You put a certain amount of pressure on somebody. But I did this job, for 19 years. There's a point at which I'm putting too much pressure on, and I may get what I want to hear, but it may not be true.
But if somebody was stealing millions and millions of dollars from American taxpayers, not filing tax returns the way you're supposed to file, when you were a prosecutor, wouldn't you go after that individual? He has to reimburse the government for what, $11 million?
Of course I'd go after him, but in a proportionate way. I wouldn't raid his house. I would not put him in solitary confinement for 8 months. That's totally crazy. Most terrorists aren't in solitary confinement. This is a Weissman-inspired deal. Read the Sidney
So
Powell.
let me ask you this. Why do you think the president believes that Mueller acted honorably?
You got to let me finish the sentence.
Please.
Sidney Powell wrote a book called Empire. I've forgotten the name of the book, but it's a book about the abuse of power. 2 chapters are devoted to Andrew Weissman, who was his chief henchman.
He was one of the prosecutors working with Mueller.
Oh, but he was handling the Manafort case. And he's the one that did the questioning. 13 times, back and forth. The guy was in solitary. They contended that he knew that the president and the candidate had knowledge of the meeting with that Russian woman. He contended, I don't have that knowledge.
At the Trump Tower in New York.
Correct. Each time they would tell him, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying. They'd send him back to solitary, bring him back again. Now, they did the same thing with Jerome Corsi, who refused to read their script. We happened to have that material sent to us. It was kind of a big deal at the time that it happened. And Corsi was being told to lie. So there were things.
So you disagree clearly with the president on whether Mueller acted honorably.
But here's what I think. Here's what I think.
Well, hold on a second. Hold on. Let me get to the next question. Then you tell me what you think. Does the president accept the Attorney General's characterization in his letter? You have a copy of it. I have a copy that Russia did, in fact, interfere in the U.S. presidential election in 2016.
I have no reason to believe he disagrees with it.
You've never discussed that with the president?
The president doesn't disagree that Russians interfered. What he disagrees with is that he had anything to do with it.
But the president did,
anyway.
Listen to what the president said in Helsinki after he met with the Russian leader Putin.
But that's kind of switching with the headline.
No. Listen to this.
The headline here
Hold on
is
a second.
that after 2 years of saying collusion on this network.
But hold on a second.
He was
the whole purpose of Mueller's investigation.
You agree he was exonerated on collusion, don't you?
Well, of course he was. That's what it says here.
So wasn't the reporting?
They could not establish conspiracy or links.
But that was the premise.
Hold on a second.
Wasn't the reporting quite unfair for the last 2.5 years about collusion?
Adam
Schiff saying he had evidence of collusion.
Listen to what the whole purpose of the Mueller investigation in the letter that the then acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein wrote to Mueller on May 17th, 2017, was to ensure a full and thorough investigation of the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. They investigated that. They confirmed that. That's in the Attorney General's summary of the Mueller report. But the question is, and it's always intrigued me, why the president, maybe alone, refuses to still accept that. Listen to what he said in Helsinki. Listen to this.
My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
So, I mean, that's clearly the whole objective of this report, why the Russians interfered in the U.S. presidential election. And the U.S. intelligence community, as you know, they concluded they had three goals, the Russians: to denigrate Hillary Clinton and harm her electability and potential presidency, help Donald Trump's election chances, and undermine public faith in U.S. democracy. Why won't the president accept what his own intelligence community tells him?
Since he has now said that this is a very good report, and I agree in the main that it is a very, very good summary, I have no reason to believe he doesn't accept those. He read it. He didn't object to it. I mean, I went over this letter in great detail with him, and the only thing we have any issue with is the special counsel punting the decision on obstruction to the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, and OLC.
And
I think he should have made that decision one way or the other.
A lot of people agree with you on that, that he shouldn't have punted on that. He should have made a specific recommendation.
I also remember, it also does not exonerate him.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Never say that.
I'm going to get to that in a moment.
That's kind of close to an improper statement.
The Attorney General, in his letter, the four-page letter, he quotes Mueller as saying that the investigation, I'm quoting now from the letter, did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government, which is obviously what you want to hear. So is there an innocent explanation, Mayor, why so many Trump associates were meeting with Russians during the campaign?
It wasn't that many. They were meeting with other people. 16.
There you see them on the screen.
Probably a 50 that were meeting with people from Great Britain or people from France or.
Well, Great Britain and France are allies of the United States. Russia is not.
But at the time that was happening, nobody had any idea that this would be anything about collusion. Some of those meetings were. Didn't General Flynn shake hands with a guy at the convention that walked past? They shook hands.
General Flynn, who was the president's national security advisor,
I know,
he pleaded guilty to lying about his conversations with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak. George Papadopoulos also pleaded guilty to lying about his Russian contacts. He was a national security aide to the president during the campaign. Paul Manafort, man you said was treated unfairly, he lied about his interactions with Konstantin Kilimnik, who had ties to Russian intelligence. All these people lied about their Russian contacts. None of the 16 ever went to the FBI, hold on a second, and reported the contacts they had with the FBI, with the Russians.
I mean, at the time that it happened.
Right.
There wouldn't have been any reason to do it at the time.
If a hostile adversary is coming to you and saying, we have information that can help you win the election and hurt Hillary Clinton, isn't that something you should tell the FBI about?
Information that General Flynn got. General Flynn's conversation, if you believe what has been written, was about sanctions, right? And he failed to disclose that, and he misled the vice president. It had nothing to do with dirty information on Hillary. Wait a second.
Yeah.
And it took place after the election. So whether he told the truth or didn't tell the truth got nothing to do with collusion. So I mean,
let me tell you why I'm asking the question. Because in the letter,
and Manafort's
and you've read this letter very
nothing to do
carefully.
With collusion.
Let me read what the Attorney General Bill Barr writes in his letter. He says that the Mueller investigation did not establish collusion, and then he says this, quote, despite multiple offers from Russian-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign. So once again, multiple offers from Russian-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign. Does the president regret that his associates, after getting those offers, never reported those contacts to the FBI?
I can't say whether he does or he doesn't.
Should they have reported?
I think you have taken
You're a former head of the Southern, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
Right.
If officials, associates are meeting with a hostile power like Russia, and you agree it's a hostile power, and they say we have information that is damaging to Hillary Clinton, there's information that will help Donald Trump become president, shouldn't they at least notify the FBI of that? And speak as a former U.S. attorney who led
I would
the Southern District of New York.
I would say what you're doing is you're missing the forest for the trees. The special counsel did not find, please, let me read it.
Right.
The special counsel did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts despite multiple offers from Russian, did not. That's,
I agree.
That's the headline.
The headline
The
is
other
that
a
did
little
not
footnote.
conspire or coordinate. You're absolutely right.
And then,
but the question is, what about all the multiple efforts by Russian officials to try to meet with these
I guess
Trump
if they
associates?
anticipated what was going to happen, or they had detailed knowledge of the law. Sure,
What would you
but
have?
it's not
What would you
illegal.
have done
Well, I
if a
happen to be-
Russian, during the campaign, and you were
I
working in
happen
the
to be a lawyer.
Well, what would you have
And a
done
prosecutor.
if a Russian came to you and said, "I've got information that will help Donald Trump.
guarantee you-
I have information that's very damaging to Hillary Clinton."
Okay.
What would you have done?
I would have reported, because I would have known that that could be a potential violation of the law. Not necessarily a violation of law, but a potential violation of the law. It gets you into a whole very, very esoteric discussion of, is that a campaign contribution or not? Can information be valued and seen as a campaign contribution? But out of an excess of caution, if somebody came to me, if you came to me, or somebody on the campaign came to me and said, a Russian official offered dirty information on Hillary, I would have said, let's report it. Now, you don't strictly have to do it. There's nothing illegal about not reporting a crime. Number two, this is arguably a crime. There's a big debate among lawyers as to whether or not information from a foreigner is a contribution to the campaign. Some lawyers say yes, some lawyers say no. What's the value of it? Does it have a monetary value?
An in-kind contribution.
Is there a violation of the First Amendment if you make it a violation? A hell of a complex question. No strict duty to report. Now, I guarantee you that most of these people that heard this, I don't know exactly who they are. I have a pretty good idea because I think I know everything they have. They wouldn't have even known that it's a violation of the law. They wouldn't have known it. They would have had no idea that if a French person comes up to you and says, I got dirty information on Trump, or I got dirty information on Hillary, that that's some kind of a possible violation of the law. I think, Wolf, please, I really believe this is a rather small point in light of the fact that for 2.5 years, he's been accused all over the world.
So let's get to that exoneration.
Treason.
Let's get to the whole issue of obstruction, which is what
No,
you
let's
want
get
to
to the issue of the
obstruction
really
of-
main. This began as a much exaggerated. Donald Trump is almost a traitor. He's conspiring with the Russians. It isn't true.
It didn't begin like that. It began because there was a suspicion that Russia was trying to interfere in the U.S. election.
Maybe somebody invented it, the Trump part to it. Maybe somebody invented
what they said, the first contact
somewhere
was George
outside the United
Papadopoulos
States.
told an Australian diplomat in London that Russians had information.
Maybe it's going to turn out that
that's
that
the way
wasn't
it
the first.
started.
That may not be correct.
You got better information?
I do, but I'm not at liberty to disclose it right now.
All right, let's talk about this other issue.
But I do think the question of how it started is a very valid.
Very important, because the George Papadopoulos report to the U.S. government about, to the Australians, actually was the Australian diplomat who notified the U.S. government of this conversation.
He immediately had an exculpatory conversation, which is ignored, saying, I have no knowledge of any information. I have no knowledge of any hacking. That information is left out of the affidavit, which is a complete perjury. 4 affidavits. Nobody ever tells the judge that Steele never went to Russia. He wrote an expert report on Russia. Hadn't been there for 9 years. Nobody told the judge that Steele got fired by the FBI.
Let's talk about the president.
Nobody told the judge that the Steele dossier, which they based the affidavit on, Hillary Clinton paid $1.1 million to have that written. Kind of puts a little doubt on the credibility of it.
Let's talk about the president. He says this report, based on the summary all of us have read from the Attorney General, is a complete and total exoneration. The letter from the Attorney General overall is, I agree with you, very good news for the president. But when the president characterized it as a complete exoneration, this is what Bill Barr, the Attorney General, quotes Mueller as saying. While this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. Is the president frustrated by that one line that's quoted in this document?
No, I think what the president is saying is that when you read this letter and you read the next 2 paragraphs of the letter right after that, this decision about is it a crime or isn't it a crime was punted to the Attorney General, to Rod Rosenstein and the Office of Legal Counsel. I understand, although I don't have detailed knowledge of this, I've heard this news reports. They took 2 to 3 weeks to study it.
3 weeks ago.
That's about right. I know what they did. I worked in the Justice Department for a lot of my life. They gave it to OLC.
Office of Legal Counsel.
Office of Legal Counsel are the geniuses, along with the Solicitor General of the Justice Department. And they reviewed every case on obstruction of justice and came to this conclusion. That exonerates it. So I guess technically you'd have to say that Mueller and Barr exonerated him on collusion and the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, and OLC exonerated him on obstruction, not Mueller. Mueller punted. Mueller said, I can't say it's a crime, but I can't exonerate him.
Right.
Now, this is about as good as a declination letter I've ever seen. I wrote many of
I
these.
assume the president is upset that Mueller did not completely exonerate him on this as he did on coordination
He says he's an
or
honorable
conspiracy.
guy. He said he's an honorable guy, so I guess he feels maybe the guy was confused and he punted it.
So there are some who
I think I have a guess as to what happened. I think his staff was in debate over it, and it's a question of interpretation.
But
not fact.
you know Robert Mueller.
Yes.
You've worked with him over the years
Yes, and
when he was the FBI
and
director.
aside from the criticism I gave you before, I have a good view of him, and everybody makes mistakes.
So you think if his staff said to him, blah, 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 he wouldn't make up his own mind?
Well, he says. I mean, I imagine the Attorney General is describing what the special counsel views as difficult issues of law and fact. So that I have to take it at his word that that's
Because
what
some have suggested maybe he was punting to the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General for them to conclude, because he was reporting to them. But others have suggested maybe he was punting to let Congress decide whether the president did anything wrong.
Well, he's too good a lawyer to not realize that eventually this is the Attorney General's decision. The Attorney General could reverse him on all these things. So the person that actually charges in the Justice Department is the Attorney General. So he knew the Attorney General would have to have a position on it. Also, from the idea that he reported it 3 weeks early, I think he knew that there would be an OLC review. I also think there's another possibility.
But you don't know for sure that Mueller wanted the Attorney General to make the final decision. You haven't spoken to Mueller or heard from him about that.
I haven't.
I'm hoping someday we'll all be able to hear from him on that issue and a whole bunch of other issues.
But I do think that if he was punting it to Congress, he would not have reported 3 weeks early that he couldn't reach a decision.
You want this whole Mueller report to be released with the exclusion of some grand jury testimony or national security secrets, classified information. You want it to be released when?
As soon as they can do it, consistent with the law. If they want to release it, this week, next week, the week after, knowing how long it's reported to be, it would seem to me it's probably going to take a week or two.
If the president...
And if they want to put out grand jury material, they can go to a judge and get a 6E order. And they might not get it, but they could try to do that.
If the president had nothing to hide,
right.
why weren't you willing to let him sit down for an interview with the special counsel? He answered written questions that were submitted. He answered those questions in writing, but he never agreed to sit down and talk about it.
I don't want to get sued for malpractice. I'd be a hell of an awful lawyer if I walked him into a situation where I had every reason to believe they weren't in good faith wanting to question him. They were going to try to trap him into some kind of contradiction with a Cohen who's lying his whatchamacallit off, and they don't seem to care about it. I reviewed the entire Flynn situation, and I'm not arguing that Flynn told the truth, didn't tell the truth, but they trapped him. I mean, they weren't seeking information from Flynn. They had the information. They knew that the meeting took place. They had the memo of it. They had the pictures of it, everything. They asked him, did you have any meetings? So, well, let me finish, because it's very important how we made the decision. They asked the question. Flynn said, I don't remember a meeting like that. Now, if you're seeking information, you take the memo out of the drawer, you show it to him, you say, look, you had a meeting with Kislyak. Does that refresh your recollection about that meeting? If you're trying to trap him into perjury, you keep it in the desk. And then when it comes time to charge, you put that next to his testimony and you say perjury. Now, we also know that some of the FBI agents didn't think he lied about it. They thought he had a failure of recollection. And I don't know how that all switched into charging him.
I take it in the Q&A, the written Q&A, you didn't want the president to answer any questions involving obstruction. Is that right?
A couple of reasons for that. Number one, the privilege that he has, the executive privilege that he has, is much stronger from the day he gets elected president. So just conveniently divided into the collusion, alleged collusion, all took place before he was president.
He was a private citizen.
He was a private citizen. We could have made a claim of privilege. Frankly, our chances of winning their chances of winning would be better than ours. On the other hand, from the day he becomes president, and certainly from the day he's inaugurated, the executive privilege becomes very strong. And the other one becomes strong because of what Dowd and Ty Cobb did. By turning over 1.4 million documents, by not objecting to 50 witnesses. Remember, Bill Clinton objected to those witnesses and fought in court with Starr, made it harder for him to assert executive privilege. And remember what happened Bill Clinton. He got indicted for perjury because they sat him down for an interview.
A grand jury.
It was kind of on our mind, you know. So I'm a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I mean, I am a politician, but in this role, I'm a lawyer. My job is to protect my client. If he weren't the president of the United States, there'd be no consideration at all. He would not. Most people under investigation do not go into a grand jury or testify under oath. Every prosecutorial decision I ever made, I didn't have the benefit.
Will you release, and you can release on your own, the Q&A that the president did in writing with Mueller?
Let's see what they release.
No. Look, will you release it? Assuming they don't want to release it for whatever reason. Do you have a problem releasing that?
I don't have. The answers are all truthful. Otherwise, you would have seen.
Right.
You'd have seen some.
We'd love to see what the special counsel asked and what the president said. I assume you guys worked really hard to write the answers.
Of course. No, he gave the answers, and we worked really hard to make sure that his recollection was correct, that he looked at the documents you have to look at, which wouldn't have happened in a situation where they're trying to trap him into perjury.
You can assure us that we will see the written Q&A.
I can't assure you you're going to see it. I have no idea what's going to be released.
If it's up to you, you would release it.
There's nothing in there that I'd have any problem with.
Okay, well, that's
in
good
fact,
to know.
I think you know most of the answers that are in there.
So we wouldn't be surprised with any.
I don't think there's any surprise.
Was it long? How long? How many pages was it?
The questions were about, recollection now, back then, 7 or 8 pages of questions. They were, I could describe them as law review questions. It had a topic, and then it had 8 sub-questions. And then our answers then go in sequence with those. So maybe our eventual answers are 15, 20 pages.
You told my colleague, Chris Cuomo, you have a 97-page rebuttal ready to be released.
Excuse me, 87.
87-page rebuttal.
I was wrong.
Can you give us a sense of what is in this report, this rebuttal?
Yeah, let's talk about obstruction. So it goes on to, it goes into why this could not be an obstruction on many different levels. One of the things the Attorney General picks up on, there was no underlying crime. By exonerating him on collusion, it turns out they're not investigating.
Some people go to jail even though they didn't commit a crime.
Well, you could.
But they lied about it.
But the Attorney General says quite correctly, it's very hard to find intent when there's not an underlying crime. You can.
With Martha Stewart.
But hard.
She didn't engage in insider trading, but she wound up in jail because she lied about it.
Although there was a very close case of insider trading involving Martha Stewart. Question of fact as to who was telling the truth or who wasn't telling the truth. In this case, there's no case of collusion. As they say, he's exonerated, not just we can't prove it. So, but that's not the only thing. Second, there's none of the things that you usually have with an obstruction case. Let's take the Flynn situation. The Flynn situation, which the president says didn't take place. But if you take Comey's testimony, Comey says the president said to me, go easy on Flynn. That's not obstruction. I never heard of an obstruction case I think it began with please. You never start with please. You start with, I'm going to hit you over the head with a bat, or I'm going to take your money away, or I'm going to kidnap your kids. There's some threat involved in it, some kind of coercion. And finally, it couldn't be obstruction because, assuming Comey's telling the truth, he didn't put in a memo on that for 3 months. So what happened? In May, he figured out he was obstructed. Back in February, I'm going to go tell people now. I'm going to report it to the FBI. So I think we could have killed that obstruction theory.
Were you surprised?
I could do the same thing with Comey, and I can do the same thing with the tweets. I describe it as, this is a very, very official legal term. I describe it as a cockamamie legal theory of obstruction.
Were you surprised that Mueller and his team didn't subpoena the president to seek an oral interview?
No.
You were bracing for that, right?
Of course we were. I mean, they could have, and we would have had a battle in court. I think, as I told you, I think on the obstruction part, after he was president, I think we had the better argument. I think we would have won that battle, particularly because they had so much information. What you have to show in order to get a president's testimony, this comes from the Espy case, who was in the Clinton administration. He tried to resist the subpoena. He lost. But the court said, you have to show, if you want to subpoena a president or cabinet, that you can't get this information any other way. We were pretty confident that whatever questions they wanted to ask, they already had the information, which is also why we suspected they were trying to trap him into perjury, because they didn't need his explanations. Why did he fire Comey? The Lester Holt interview will tell you why he fired Comey. He gave all the reasons. He's just going to repeat it.
And he mentioned Russia in that interview.
He did. There's no question Russia had, I don't know, Russia may have something to do with it, but there were 8 other reasons. That's all he needs. Yeah. 8 other reasons. That he had very, very good reasons to fire him. Hillary would have fired the guy, I think.
Well, Hillary would have fired Comey for other reasons because what he did to her on the eve of the election. But
Comey did not cover himself.
Do you know if
I hired Jim Comey?
Yeah.
Jim, I don't know what happened to him. I mean, he did not cover himself with glory in this particular case. I mean, what he did to Hillary Clinton is wrong. You don't say I'm not going to indict and then say all the bad things about somebody. And you don't say I'm not going to indict and say, but I can't exonerate. Nobody's asking you to exonerate. He raised that issue of exoneration.
Was there ever
a cheap shot?
Donald Trump Jr., not indicted, no charges filed. Was there ever thought that Mueller was going to ask him to testify? Or anyone else, Jared Kushner?
No.
Anyone else in the family?
That never came up. So we never faced a situation. What did happen persistently, and you probably heard some of these, there were these rumors that he was going to be indicted. And they come out of nowhere. And then we check, and it turned out you get one every 3 or 4 weeks. I always thought they were maliciously inspired to get the president angry. Because I can tell you, you'd assume this, the president handled the stuff against him really well. The president would get upset when it involved his family or involved some of the people who work for him or some of the kids, like some of these people you see on television had to spend an enormous amount of money and they did nothing wrong. That's the thing that gets him really riled up, and it should.
Yeah, because, in that Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016, when they met with this Russian who supposedly had dirt on Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump Jr. said, great, we'll take it. He was in that meeting. Manafort was in that meeting. And Jared Kushner was in that meeting.
Was in for half that meeting.
Who was that?
Jared was about half the meeting.
So were you surprised that they didn't call on Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner at least answer questions about that meeting?
I'm not surprised, because I think from the people on the other side of that meeting, it was quite clear I don't think they ever discussed Hillary Clinton. So it got set up that way, but it really was a pretext. It was really a pretext to talk about adoptions from Russia and the Magnitsky Act. So everybody kind of walked out on it, and it was like a half-hour meeting or less, and never touched on Hillary Clinton.
Let me get your thoughts on Senator Lindsey Graham saying that it was his idea for John McCain to go ahead and hand over that so-called Steele dossier, that Russia dossier, to the FBI. You heard him say it just a little while ago. And the president, as you know, has been really railing against the late Senator John McCain, blaming him for this whole thing. But Lindsey Graham, who was a very close friend of John McCain, says, you know what? I suggested to him, there's a lot of dirt in here. Maybe you should hand it over to the FBI.
Gee, I wasn't there. I don't know. I've read I haven't read all of it, but I've read a lot of what's in there. And I don't know if Lindsey saw it. He may have just been described to him. I think Lindsey, as a professional lawyer, law enforcement guy, if he read it, would realize it's a piece of garbage. I mean, it's a silly document. It's not a well-written intelligence document. It's obviously, it looks like a big, long National Enquirer article. It doesn't seem to come from an intelligence professional. And it's got crazy things in it, like the Russians made him an agent 10 years ago and decided 5 years ago he could be president. Now, if they could figure out 5 years ago that Donald Trump can be president, we're in a lot of trouble. They're a lot smarter than I think they are.
Yeah, that's a whole other story, of course. The SDNY, the Southern District.
There's also another thing that they did with that memo that's really, there's a specific allegation in there that Michael Cohen went to Prague to get information from the Russians. Now, all you have to do, if you're Jim Comey, there's a date, is go call the State Department and find out, what does his passport say? But they don't even take the time to do that. They're doing this extraordinary act of intruding into a man's privacy, a man who turns out to be innocent. They don't even bother to check the one fact they could check. I think that's disgraceful. It shows how cavalier they were about this.
You know the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. You once were the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. They're pretty aggressive, pretty autonomous, as you know. How worried are you that the Mueller investigation, 22 months is over with now, but their investigation, for some perspective, is only just beginning?
It's not only just beginning, it's been going on, gosh,
but it's intensified.
Before the summer. I'm not worried about it at all, because I think that the theory of campaign finance is there's no violation of the law. The reality is, when you make payments to settle personal claims, even if you're in a political campaign, and even if it helps your political campaign, that can't possibly be a campaign contribution. They are relying on a very, very faulty legal theory.
But they cited that to convict Michael
They
Cohen
did,
as an in-kind campaign
That
contribution.
doesn't mean anything.
The
Nobody
money that was
challenged
given,
Let him try to indict somebody on it and challenge it. The court will throw it out.
he pleaded guilty to it.
I'd like you to consider the following. If that can be considered a campaign contribution, then I can run for office now. I can go raise $5 million. I can settle every single case against me. I can use my donors' money to do it, and they put me in jail because it's stupid. And that's the theory they have, and it's going to fall down. And
You
let them
noticed
pursue it.
in that document, in that charge against Michael Cohen, and the judge accepted it, the president of the United States is identified as, quote, individual number one.
Whether it is or isn't, it's not a crime. If it's a crime, then we got 30 plus members of Congress who over the last several years have had claims of sexual harassment paid off with taxpayers' money, and they didn't make them campaign contributions. We've got a real problem if that's the case.
Did the president do that?
What?
Work with Michael Cohen to pay off Stormy
No, I'm not
Daniels?
saying he did. I'm telling you that if they try to allege that as a crime, it is not a crime. And every commissioner of the FEC that I've seen write about it comes to that conclusion, because you would have this weird situation that people would run for office to clean out all the claims against them and use donors' money to do that. It would be an absurd application of it. And you shouldn't be taking questionable applications of campaign finance and trying to make them into crimes. That's kind of the problem they had with obstruction of justice as well.
You know, the Attorney General in your home state of New York, the state Attorney General, he's investigating. She's investigating all sorts of activities involving the president.
She ran on the platform that I'm going to investigate Donald Trump, and I'm going to get him for something. Very credible.
So you're not worried
What
about you're not worried about
She's
that?
looking at the foundation. That's the foundation in which he paid out $19 million, and he raised only $18 million. He donated about $8 million of his own money, and there's not a single claim that anybody got. Nobody was paid. Not like the Clinton Foundation. No big salaries. No trips paid for. No perks. Not $150 million contribution from Russia like the Clinton Foundation. I don't think there's a problem.
But are you worried about SDNY investigating the Trump organization?
No, because I think the Trump organization is clean. It's a clean organization. Here's what I really worry about as a citizen. This is like saying I'm going to go back in this man's life. I'm going to go back and find something he did wrong so we can hurt him. So I don't know. How long is that going to go on? We don't do that to other presidents. We don't go and look. They started with collusion. Wrong. Now it's branched off into this, and that would like them the fourth degree of separation. At some point, it's got to end because it really is harassment.
Finally, you've been working with the president now for 2 years. You worked in the campaign. What's next for you? Are you going to stick around and continue this? What's the next chapter?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of other things. I run a security business, and we do security consulting in the United States, all over the world. I love it.
But are
I
you
help
still
to
be the
reduce
president's lawyer?
As he needs me. I mean, this still hasn't ended yet. I mean, we got to get the report out. We got to see what Congress is going to do. This morning I heard on this network a Democratic strategist who said he doesn't think it's wise for the Democrats to pursue impeachment. And maybe it's a good idea because they'll go back to issues. And he never thought impeachment was much of a campaign issue anyway.
I think it was Jim Clyburn, who's the Democratic whip in the House of Representatives. He said something along those lines. You got to move on. This chapter is over with. Nancy Pelosi says, forget about impeachment for the time being as well.
She had the right standard, politically, which is you got to have bipartisan support. If you don't have bipartisan support, it's going to look like a completely political witch hunt. Yeah. And I don't think you're going to get bipartisan support based on this. And I have a pretty good idea of the rest of what they have. And what you're going to find out with obstruction is this is a matter of interpretation. There's not some new fact, some new startling fact about it. All the facts about obstruction. You can interpret them several different ways, which is why it was a difficult question.
And that's why we're looking forward to
legal question.
Looking forward to getting the full report so we can all read it.
Man, I wish you would. And if anything's held back, I know somebody's going to say, "Oh my God, that's I would like the whole thing to be out so we could debate it."
I'm sure the president's grateful to you for your help. Thanks so much for coming.
I'm grateful that however they got there, wrong or not wrong, I'm grateful that an innocent man was vindicated.
And you're always welcome to come back
Thank
here
you.
into our Situation Room. Have you been to the White House Situation Room?
Yeah.
So you know they have.
I
we
was
have-
in the Reagan administration.
Of course.
Remember, I go way back, I'm almost as old as you.
Maybe one of these days. Hey, Mayor, thanks so much.